Sorry about that. It's very interesting when you're trying to quickly do your intro, push your buttons, and then suddenly from nowhere, an email comes up saying you're about to go live, and then it blocks the button that you need to get to. The wonders of technology. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me for another Sutherland Report live and record. And I'm very blessed by a friend of mine will be joining me, who I am now going to bring on, which is Patrick. Patrick will introduce himself, and then we're going to have a wonderful conversation, which I hope we will carry on throughout the year. So thank you. Patrick,
Well, thanks
lovely
for
to
having me,
see
Mark.
you.
I appreciate
No,
it.
not at all. It's really lovely to see you, and thank you for spending some of your precious time with me. I really do appreciate it. Patrick, tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you?
So I'm an independent journalist. I've been a journalist since 1999 when I joined the Navy. I was a journalist in the U.S. Navy, and after I get out, I worked in live television for a long time, television news. And since the whole Trump MAGA phenomenon started, I've been going to events, live events, everywhere from San Francisco down to Miami to Austin, Texas, up to New York. So I've been following the MAGA movement with my camera for the last basically like 6 years, um, including January 6th. I know you have a certain passion about that. And we can talk about that as much as you want, because I was there that day and I testified in the trial of Joe Biggs and Ethan Nordine and Enrique Tarrio. So yeah. Anyway, that's where I'm coming from. And by the way, I'm a liberal. So this would be probably upsetting to some people, but I feel like it actually shows that we can all get along. You're a conservative. I'm a liberal. We have different opinions politically, but I think it's important that we're able to talk to each other, and I think we're like walking, talking evidence right now that is possible.
Thank you for that. Thank you for what you've just said, and you're absolutely right. And we have other mutual friends, for argument's sake, David Summerall from
Great
stop8.com,
guy,
etc.
great guy. Yeah.
And absolutely, and I had the pleasure to see him again this summer, so in person. So that was fantastic. But no, you've said a really important thing. We may have differences on a variety of different subjects, but if we can actually sit down and have a discussion and actually listen to each other, then I think that's really important and very important. And to be able to debate and say, I may not agree with you, but I respect your point of view. And I do
Sure.
respect your point of view. But this is where we have reached in our discourse, which I find, I think, like you, rather concerning. Patrick, you lead the conversation because you can and you're really good at it. And just what is on your heart, my friend? What is concerning you right now? What would you like to talk about?
Well, I'm worried. Frankly, I'm borderline terrified about what's going to happen in the U.S. over the next year, especially when we get to the summer. Because anybody who's paid any attention to political protests or whatever over the last decades in America understands that when the weather gets warm, people tend to act silly. Right? We end up with I mean, every riot that's ever happened in this country has happened in the summer. Right? Whether we go back to Rodney King or we talk about the 2020 BLM riots or whatever, like this is when it's going to happen. In an election year, I can't even I'm actually terrified because I'm going to go to these events and I've for the first time in my life as or my political life as somebody who goes to activist events, I've considered what I need to do to defend myself. I didn't think about that in 2019. I didn't think about that in 2018 when I was going to Proud Boy events and things of this nature, right? I'm kind of worried about it now. I'm like, do I need to bring weapons, to defend myself? And I never thought about that before. So I think that, people need to understand that this summer is going to be unlike any other that I can remember. And it worries me.
If we go back, and you've touched on a load of things, because the important things you've touched on the history, and we've touched on the recent history. We look at the BLM riots, etc. If we go back into sort of America discourse, we look at the demonstrations over Vietnam, for argument's sake, the demonstrations of
1968, yeah,
yeah,
right,
1968. And then again,
yeah,
putting it in a geopolitical background of what was happening in Paris and other parts around the world,
yeah,
the summer of revolution, etc., etc. But the fact that people were understandably protesting about Vietnam, protesting about the draft, the fact that very sadly, I think 50, maybe 54,000 American servicemen, maybe women, died in Vietnam, and there is that incredible monument to that.
yeah.
Why has it got to this point? What has brought you to this point where, and it may sound a stupid question, where you have never been so worried? Because you've named people at the beginning in regard to dear Bigsy, dear in regard to Enrico. They are people that right?
Yeah.
And it'd be brilliant to touch on breach and events. What why are you so concerned? And I also share that concern, to be honest. But
Mm.
specifically, Patrick, what is it? Can you drill down on that?
I think it's because I mean, it's easy to blame. A lot of people blame social media for people getting involved in things that they
Mm,
otherwise wouldn't care about. Like,
mm,
I just went to the Trump rally in New Hampshire
right,
last week, right?
right.
And it was really strange to see a bunch of people in New England, and I'm a lifelong New Englander, right? To see people who hadn't voted, and this is something that I run across all the time. In when I was in Nashville, Tennessee, I had the same experience with a bunch of people I interviewed. Women like who were 60 years old said I'd never voted before, 2016. They weren't interested in politics. So but now they're not only interested in politics, they're really extremely interested in politics and just very fired up. And so I just think you have more people involved in the process. And you could say that might be a good thing or it might be a bad thing depending on your perspective. Like I can say, well, it's not better to have a whole bunch of ignorant people get involved in something, right? Or I could say, well, hey, everybody should have a vote, and so the more the better. I think that the problem is that more people are involved with a lower level of information. Like you might call them low information voters. I think that Rush Limbaugh kind of coined that term, right? Low information voters.
Mm, mm.
So I think you just have a lot of people involved who don't know anything, who are just fundamentally ignorant, and it makes it more dangerous because you've got people who don't know anything about a thing getting heavily involved, and it's not it's a toxic recipe, really.
Could you give me an example from your point of view in regard
Yeah.
to ignorance? What are these people specifically ignorant about?
Sure. So I did an interview with a guy named Joe Thomas, who, if your viewers don't know, Joe is I really think is a really nice guy, but he was convicted of crimes on January 6th. Now I don't think he should have been convicted. I vehemently disagree with the verdict, but he was convicted. Okay. So I talked to him post conviction after he'd been convicted. And I said, Joe, you understand that Mike Pence didn't have the legal authority to actually just overturn the election, right? You get that at this point, right? And he looked me straight in the face and told me, oh, no, he did have the ability to do that. This is a guy who's going to go to jail for probably 10 years, who still isn't willing to understand that he was hoodwinked. Like this was all nonsense. And I'm like, Joe, like what has to happen? Apparently nothing can convince you of this. But a basic reading of the Constitution would tell you that that's not a possibility. and he doesn't understand it. If going to the clink for 10 years doesn't convince you, I don't know what would. Apparently nothing. So this is why I have an issue when you're having a political discussion. It's not about opinions. It's about basic facts. It's about things that we used to be able to agree on, and now, for some reason, basic facts are somehow, they're just up to whatever subjective nonsense that you you want to throw at it. Like this is disturbing, and it makes it difficult to have an honest discussion.
Okay, and I respect that. Can you? I think it'd be really important to break it down in regard to the Mike Pence. In regard to that day,
Sure.
was
Yeah.
then so the electoral college votes come in, then there was
Yeah.
going to be a ratification of
Yeah.
that.
Right.
What were they then, in your opinion, what were they expecting Mike Pence to do, other than the fact, and please tell me if I've got this wrong, whether that what people were expecting him then to go back, take their individual states back to either recount or re-look at the results that they had come to. Is that a fair point? And were they looking for Mike Pence
No.
to then actually do that?
No. The authority of the vice president in that situation is purely ceremonial. He is
Right.
simply supposed to count the votes. That's it.
Mm,
There's nothing
mm.
else in any legislation that says he should do anything other than that. The idea that he has some sort of authority is absurd. And one of the things that I said to Joe was, I said, would you like Kamala Harris to have that same authority in 2024? Because if the vice president gets to decide who wins, think about this, right? This is a good point. Richard Nixon ran for president in 1960 and lost to John F. Kennedy, right?
Yes, yes.
He was the sitting vice president at the time, right? He lost an extremely close election. I mean, an extremely close election in which a lot of people think, maybe there might have been something wrong with the whole thing. That's not, like, I'm not the first person to say that Nixon may have won that election, right? So he was the vice president. He could have done something. And Richard Nixon was, by the way, one of the most authoritarian presidents we've ever had, right? Don't you think and he was a lawyer, by the way, don't you think if he thought there was any constitutional way that he could have just seized power, he would have done it? Of course he would have. Of course he would have. Mike Pence is not a stupid person. I may think he's a jackass in a lot of ways, but he's not dumb. He knew damn well he had no authority to do that. And so he didn't. And like, I don't like giving him a lot of credit for just not doing something insane. I mean, it's okay, you didn't fall down the stairs today. Good for you. Like, but he knew damn well he didn't have that authority, just like Richard Nixon knew he didn't have that authority in 1960. So,
It's a very
it's
interesting. No,
yeah.
it's interesting because Nixon and Kennedy actually had respect for each other. They did know each other. Nixon was rather concerned after JFK was shot and actually did did say those comments. So
Yeah.
the book that I have, The Silent Coup, about Nixon then leaving office, is all rather interesting because it is murky. And you're right, and I appreciate you saying that, because the questions about did he actually win that election? Yes, may have done. Did he actually concede for the good of the nation? And that, I think, is rather interesting. And also, when JFK really was saying, I am trying to unite. I want to unite the country. I'm going to shut up in a sec, because the comment I want to make is the gentleman that you're talking to, with the background of all the allegations then, and sorry, but in my opinion the evidence is there as well in regard to voter shenanigans and all the rest. You're right, the emotion and the fact that on the floor that day, I think at 105, 106, Ted Cruz with two other senators were then asking Pence about the rules of the game. How does this go in regard to voting if we don't agree? And then suddenly some very then unfortunate events then happened on the other side. This is such a huge subject, Patrick, because we could discuss this for hours, and I think it's really, really important to discuss this for hours. So the gentleman that, sorry, it's Joe is his name, the guy that you were talking to. I do apologize. He then has been, what have they accused him of doing? What have they actually accused him of doing?
You're talking about Joe Biggs?
Yeah, no, not Joe Biggs.
Yeah.
Was it Joe Biggs you were having the conversation with? The gentleman that
Joe Thomas.
Joe Thomas,
yeah.
the gentleman that's facing 10 years. What have they convicted him of?
Obstructing an official proceeding, which sounds to me like one of the stupidest charges you could possibly. I mean, I'm laughing, but it really isn't funny because nothing's funny about 10 years, right? So, no. and oh, by the way, just I know that this stuff isn't supposed to matter, but it does matter because we're human beings. His wife is caring for his father, who is very ill, and who almost certainly will not be able to care for him while Joe is in prison, not making any money to support the family. So this is a real life problem. It's not just some abstract thing off to the side. These are real people, and real people have actual lives, and they have children, and this is important. And like I said, I disagree with Joe on just about everything politically, but he is a fundamentally decent person, and I spent a good amount of time down in DC when I got subpoenaed to testify in the trial, and I was there and talked to him. And like I said, I might disagree with him, but he is a good guy. And these charges are ridiculous. I think the charges against Joe Biggs and Enrique and Rufio are ridiculous as well. I think that they committed a crime that day. They were where they shouldn't have been, and I think that by the time they came up for trial, I think that time served would have been good enough, and they should have been just given time served, a slap on the wrist, and go home and don't do it again.
Please tell me if I'm wrong, but Enrique wasn't even in the capital.
He wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't in the city of Washington. He was in Baltimore at the time, and yeah, so it's all ridiculous. And I said that during the trial, they brought me down there because because I had spent the morning with Joe and with Rufio, and my testimony was based on the fact that I am absolutely certain that there was no plan to storm the Capitol that day. My testimony said that, hey, look, I think these guys made a bad decision. They snapped. They did something they shouldn't have done, but it was not a conspiracy, because what they got convicted for was conspiracy. And to have a conspiracy, you actually have to have some sort of planning. And I'm positive that they didn't have that. So, whether I agree with them or not, or, a lot of my liberal friends are like, well, these guys are, assholes, so whatever. That's not what they were not charged with being assholes. They were charged with conspiracy, and that's just not what happened that day, as far as I'm concerned. And I was there that day. So
when your liberal friends are describing them as assholes, because these are friends of yours, these are people that right?
Yeah.
You see, this is, and I'm just going to say this. I want to say this while we're having this discussion, when the people viewing and people in the future viewing. One of the delights, one of the challenges that we have is to go and have conversations with people that we may not agree with, but we can actually sit down and have a beer or a glass of water and have a good discussion with, and respect. Thank you. And respect on cue, and respect each other's opinion. And the thing is, it's coming together with facts. So just out of interest, when your liberal friends describe them as arseholes, what framework are they using there? To them, why are these people arseholes?
Yeah, well, they're not using any kind of framework, because they like This is something that I've tried to explain to a lot of people on both sides who can't understand why I spend so much time with people I disagree with.
Mm,
And the way I try and break it down is that, look, every single time, including last week when I went to the New Hampshire Trump rally,
mm,
I I put myself in a position before I step out of the car or the train or whatever it is. I say, look, do not assume that you know anything about anybody that you don't already know, right? Do not go in there with preconceived notions about because you have a MAGA hat on, that means you're a racist. Don't
mm,
think that kind
mm,
of stuff because if you do, you're going to condescend and insult people and you're going to get a bad result. So just make sure you don't do that. Now, this should generally speaking, like you shouldn't have to tell yourself that, but I understand walking into a politically charged moment. So I go out of my way to make sure that I don't have preconceived notions about people, right? So if I look at your flag back there and I can see you have a Star of David flag,
mm,
that I could assume if I were, being a complete scumbag, I could assume that you hate Palestinians. But that would be ridiculous because if I
mm,
do that, our
mm,
conversation about the Israeli Palestinian conflict is going to be completely pointless, right?
mm, mm,
Because I've already decided what I think you think.
mm, mm,
Now, that may not be. You just may be pro Israel, doesn't mean you're anti Palestinian, right? So you have to go into these discussions without these preconceived notions that make it impossible for you to have a reasonable discussion with people. And so it's hard for me to explain to my some of my liberal friends why I can be friends with a guy like Joe. But the reason I am friends with a guy like Joe is because I've listened to him talk. I've listened to him talk about his time in Iraq. I'm talking about Joe Biggs now. His
yes.
time
Yeah.
in Iraq. I've listened to
Mm,
him talk about how much he cares for his daughter. I've
mm,
listened to him talk about just human things,
mm,
like just stuff that makes us all
mm,
stuff we can all relate to.
mm,
And when I talk about that with some of my liberal friends, they just can't understand it. They're like, "Well, he's still a scumbag," and I'm like, "Well, because you haven't sat down and had a conversation with him,
mm,
you can say that,
mm,
but I can't because I have sat down and I have had those conversations, and I went into those conversations without preconceived notions, and that's so it seems to be a pretty obvious thing to me, but apparently it's very difficult for a lot of people to understand.
It's something that I genuinely admire you for, and I think it's really important.
Appreciate it.
But I, on those occasions when I've been in a situation where I can have a conversation with someone on the other side that doesn't agree with anything I'm saying, but at least we're able to have a conversation,
Right.
and then walk away, having exchanged opinions. And I think it's so important. Conversation for our mental health is so important too. And you've said a really powerful thing, which is they were over here and it's led them to be in this position over here. This is a journey. So I need to understand their journey. Patrick, when you were asked to go to Washington, D.C. to testify on behalf of friends, of people you know,
Yeah.
how and within the background of now what we now know, that personal opinion, how how does that make you feel? Because suddenly you've got your liberal friends saying one thing, and you've got, well, actually, I've got friends of mine that have just been jailed, and I think this is a bit OTT, or maybe not.
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Right.
How do you fit that juxtaposition?
Well, my response immediately to most of my liberal friends who thought that that wasn't a good idea was that, do you support pretrial confinement?
Yeah.
Because last I checked, liberals don't support that, right? And I have never supported pretrial confinement my entire
Mm.
life unless somebody is a physical danger or a flight risk. And obviously, there's no way that Joe Biggs could get out of the country, and he's never
Could
been
you just
convicted of
break?
any kind of
Sorry,
violent
could
crime.
you? I apologize. Could you just break that down? So, pre-trial confinement is the fact that they should be released on bail and then brought
Yes.
back to stand
Yeah.
trial. That is what you're saying.
And I can tell you that so after Joe was originally arrested
Mm,
in Florida, I had a lot of like Zoom conversations with him. We talked pretty regularly, right? And he had like the ankle bracelet on, and he was at home and he was on confinement, but he was able to have his daughter come over and visit him, and all this. Um, and he was abiding by the rules of his confinement, right?
Mm.
But one day they just showed up. The cops just showed up and said, "Hey, we're dragging you back to DC to put you in what you would call a gulag," right?
Mm.
And there was no reason for it. He wasn't going anywhere. He was just there. He was. They knew. Excuse me. They knew exactly where he was because they had an electronic device on his ankle to tell them where he was. Like this was absurd, and he was shocked by the fact that they showed up and said, "Hey, you have to go to jail." Why? Like yesterday it was okay for me to be at home in Florida and you monitor me, but today I have to go to jail in DC. This didn't make any sense. He didn't commit a new crime. And that's absurd. So yeah, the whole idea of pretrial confinement for me has always been a problem, right? I just think it's kind of funny, and this is where I'm going to take a shot at people on the right. Like nobody on the right ever seemed to have a problem with it until it involved some of their guys. And so that's why I think, like, I'm glad you guys have come over to the right side about this, but it took too damn long. So, sorry, but
No, I mean, I hear that. I mean, I will remind you, we look at the way what the Clintons brought to your prison system in America. 3 strikes and
yes,
you're out,
yes,
and suddenly various members of their friends building prisons and making a lot of money out of the system and creating the criminals to put them into the nice buildings that they call
you are correct, sir.
incarcerations.
Yeah.
And this is it. And again, no, thank you, and I do genuinely appreciate that. It isn't about playing games and going, well, I'm going to top trump you with that. Excuse the pun. What I'm trying, we have to give a background to this, because you talked something that's very important in regard to pretrial, that America is supposed to be a country of laws. Well, we're supposed to be a country of laws too, and that's another thing. How, put it in this context, how has America then changed for you from 1999, then from the Navy, right up until this point? What political change have you seen that again is contributing to you being rather disturbed for this year?
I think it's social media. I really think it. Like I think that's the short answer to a more complicated question. But I think it's social media because I think that more people are involved and are low information voters,
Mm.
and so you end up with absurdity. It sounds like it's almost too simple to be the answer, but it really sometimes the answer really is that simple, So I think it's social media. I think it's people getting involved with very little information on what is actually happening and being validated by other idiots on social media who just who just regurgitate the nonsense that they want to hear, So yeah, and that and the fact that the news media has become a business of not providing people with information, but providing people with information that they want to hear, and that goes either way. So you Fox or MSNBC, can give you whatever you want. So you decide to listen to that stuff. And I was at a Chris Christie rally,
Mm.
if you could call it that, like because there were about 50 people there last week, and like I would never vote for Chris Christie, but I think he's a smart guy. He's an intelligent human being, and he was governor of New Jersey. It's a big state, so anyway. But he had this small crowd, and he's talking to people, and he's making like policy arguments and all this stuff, and nobody gives a damn. He's going to get crushed in the New Hampshire primary by Trump and by Nikki. I mean, forget Nikki Haley, but just Trump is going to crush him in this thing without actually talking about any substantive policy issues. He doesn't have to, because people are just interested in entertainment and not policy. And a lot of that has to do with social media, in my opinion.
Well, I'll break that down. I'll break that down for you. So putting it in context of the what are the issues that America right now, the average Joe, Mrs. Joe in the streets in America is concerned about? And then we go backwards from there. What do you think what are their main concerns right now?
Well, I think in the words of James Carville, it's the economy, dummy. Like, you know what I mean? Or it's the economy, stupid. Like that is always at the forefront of American politics. It's the economy. And I think that's true probably in England. I don't want to speak
Oh
to you, but
yeah,
yeah, I
absolutely.
think yeah, right. So the economy, I think foreign policy is a big deal as far as Ukraine goes. Those are the two major issues. I think healthcare is always an issue, but the Republicans don't really want to talk about that anymore because the Democrats have kind of won that argument. So yeah, I would say it's the economy and foreign policy. So you have to look at what if Bidenomics is going to win the day, then he's going to get reelected. If not, then he's going to lose. I think it's squarely based on the economy.
Could you give me a definition of Bidenomics?
I think Bidenomics. Yeah, I can. I think Bidenomics is embodied in the infrastructure bill that he got passed, which was a bipartisan bill, by the way, which is hard to do these days. The idea that we're going to spend money to make money. We're going to actually spend money to build bridges and roads and fix what's broken in this country, and that will spur economic growth. And you can look at it and see we had over 5% growth, GDP growth in the fourth quarter of 2023. I mean, that is what Trump promised but never delivered in his entire 4 years as president. So I would say Bidenomics is working pretty well.
You would say that, but I respect where you got that statistic from. Is the border concerning people? Is illegal immigration concerning people?
Yes, it is. Of course it is. And it should. It absolutely should. The border is broken. Our policies as far as the southern border goes have been broken for decades, right? We should have been able to fix it a very long time ago. But the problem with the border policy is that both parties like to keep the issue rather than fix the issue, right? So Republicans like to let it stay broke so they can complain about how many illegal immigrants are coming in. The Democrats like to let it stay broke so they can complain about Republicans being racist. So this is what we're dealing with. The fact of the matter is, if we were to have a decent guest worker program and put a reasonable amount of border agents down there to stop illegal immigration, we could fix the whole thing and we could do it very quickly. But unfortunately, both parties refused to do it. So, I mean, Trump had 4 years. He didn't do it. Barack Obama had 8 years. He didn't do it. So I don't think either party has any right to claim, that they're correct about the border. I just don't. But somebody's going to have to fix it eventually, and hopefully it gets done. I think it's a combination of border security and a guest worker program that would help us all out. It's doable, but the political will needs to be there, and I'm not sure it is right now.
What is the number one responsibility of the President of the United States to the people of the United States?
Well, the safety and security of the American people, of course.
Absolutely. And then if you've got 300,000, was it last month coming over the border, the month before coming over the border, this is unsustainable. I mean, you've got a mayor in I think it's in San Antonio. I sat in a seminar of his in the summer, where basically it's a sanctuary city, blah de blah, and he's then linked with other mayors, believe it or not, around America and in Canada, where they just want this free flow of people. And his attitude was, well, we don't ask questions, we don't ask for papers, we just ask for how we can help. So they have helped 200,000 illegal immigrants up to last summer in the previous 2 years. I'm sorry, but I agree with you. and I agree with Mr. Ken Paxton. This is wrong. This is illegal, and this is putting Texas, let alone the rest of the country, at risk. And I agree. I agree with legal immigration, and so did Donald Trump. I'd also say I think he started to build a wall. There are bits of rusting metal on the floor that may be coming up to actually be used to fill the gaps. I mean, I know that this has been going on since for years. I mean, Reagan gave an amnesty, as you know, and then
Yes,
got stabbed in the
1986.
back
Yep.
in 1986. We then have got the NAFTA and GAFTA agreements in regard to
Right.
Clinton, jobs going over to Mexico, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. And then even before Obama became president, and there he is as a senator saying this illegal immigration has got to stop. People can find the footage. He's talking about
He
that.
supported the idea of a wall. Yeah, I know.
Precisely, and also before that, I think under Bill Clinton they built, I don't know, 5 yards, but they did say that they did start to build it. So
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying about spending money on public sector infrastructure. I mean, FDR and all the rest. It's all being done.
Yeah.
It's nothing new. The New Deal, etc. Straight's
Yeah.
book makes this plain, but there is so much money that was printing. What were your gas prices like under Trump?
They were significantly lower, but I would say that a lot of that had to do. I mean, look, I think that anybody who suggests that the president of the United States has uh, too much sway over gas prices does not understand economy. It doesn't understand economics or politics, right? Like there were dips in the gas prices under Obama that had absolutely nothing to do with Barack Obama's policies. There were raises during Trump that had nothing to do with him. There were dips. I mean, like if you actually think that the president of the United States can control gas prices, I have to say I think you're kind of silly. Like
Well, I
it's
think
not
no,
really a
and I
serious
hear that.
conversation.
I think
Yeah,
you tell me you've got a bridge to sell me. I mean, I appreciate that. I think
yeah,
the point
yeah, yeah.
is that you
So
have
right.
resources. You have resources in
Yeah.
regard to oil, etc. Underneath your
Mm.
ground, you have
And
millions and
we
millions of
also
barrels.
understand that the quarter Q4 of 2023 was the all-time highest oil drilling in the United States history, right? We
Good.
drilled for more oil in Q4 of 2023 than ever, than any time during the Trump presidency. So when he talks about, hey, I want to drill, baby, drill, I'm like, well, we already did more than you ever did. Like, so let's I mean, come off it. Let's really be
Well,
serious
no,
about
but I know you're making a fair point, and the other thing is, I would like genuinely, see those statistics. But I hear you. But the other thing
it.
is that cheap energy via oil to put in your trucks and your cars because is
Yeah, yeah.
so important to you as an economy, because
Right,
you are vast, because you are a continent, and to give. You know this, but it's to give us a
yeah,
context. The fact, and I've said it so many times, I apologize to people in many ways, but the UK fits into Texas 2.5 times. That's
right.
just one of your states. In North Dakota, it's half the size of the UK, but only has 700,000 people
Yeah,
living
no.
in North
They have
Dakota.
one congressperson. One
Pricey,
congress. Yeah,
absolutely. But
yeah,
the amount of land there that is growing food and all the rest.
right.
If you then do not have the energy to move those tractors around, etc., to
Yeah.
then take goods from the west coast to the east coast, the trucking
Mm.
prices and all the rest, then you as a nation economically are in serious trouble
Do you think
because
there's any danger of that actually happening? Like, there's no danger of that happening. None.
I genuinely hope not. But
Yeah.
the problem is that if we've we've also got an economy where um people are going right. That's why I disagree with electric vehicles and all the rest, because of
Mm.
particularly with the vast distances that you've got to drive, and the same here. I
Right.
um I hope it doesn't. But I want to go back to something that you said earlier, and I'm not avoiding anything because we're discussing anything. But you
No, it's
said a
fine.
really interesting thing about these ladies in Nashville and the fact that suddenly they were engaged in politics in 2016, or the fact
Yeah.
that they hadn't voted until that point.
Uh,
Just why do you and I have to say, I find it quite shocking when people don't vote, but I think more and more nowadays I'm beginning to understand why.
yeah.
Why particularly women, when Emily Pankhurst over here did so much
Yeah.
work to get the vote for women, why did they become engaged? What caused them to become engaged? And why were they not
Yeah.
engaged before? And would it be social media, or would it be other things? Why? Well, they were getting information, I assume.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I wanted to talk about this. I think that so specifically, I'm thinking of one specific woman
Mm,
when I talk about somebody who said that they had never voted until 2016. I think that when Donald Trump came down that escalator in
mm,
2015, right?
mm,
He activated a whole lot of people who weren't interested in politics in the least bit before that. And the reason that he activated them is that he said something out loud that they thought they felt, but felt they could not say in public, right? He made it okay for them to say these Mexican rapists came over the border and things of that nature, right? So what he created at that point was not a political movement. It's not based on ideology. It's based on emotions. It's based on feelings. It's based on I have always felt this way, but felt I never could say it because at the Thanksgiving Day, dinner, my sister would tell me to shut up, whatever. But now I can because the Republican nominee for president says it's okay for me to say that kind of stuff, right? That's why I think we have a lot more, overtly racist, people in the U.S. who don't even have any shame for getting caught being racist on YouTube or on somebody's cell phone because they're like, no, the president said it's okay, so it's okay for me. So a lot of these people who had no interest in voting, no interest in politics, they suddenly felt like, oh, I've got the guy who's running the show is on my team. I get to be part of the club for the first time ever. And so that's I think why we see more of this stuff. And that's the genius of Trump and the MAGA movement is that they've made emotional connections where Democrats try to make political connections, and those will never be as strong as the emotional connection that Trump's able to make under any circumstances.
Is that? I mean, and I would turn around and go, it's not necessarily a bad thing to make that connection emotionally, because if we break down that, I mean, especially at the moment at the border, we don't know who's coming into the country. We can
Sure.
have a bunch of Chinese spies, most probably. We've got fentanyl coming over like in droves, like we've never
Yes,
seen.
we do.
We may even have people of of a jihadist Islamic disposition that want to do harm. Yes, we could go on and on and on, and then of course we've got the cartels
Look, I'm
smuggling.
not saying that any of
No,
that
no,
is
no.
wrong.
I'm just
You
saying
know,
that, and then
yeah,
suddenly someone makes a comment. The thing is, and I'm within a certain context, but if someone has raped someone and then they turn out to be a bit from a particular country, you're making a
of
comment
course.
about that and you're saying that this isn't right. I think that I under it's a bit like here's the parallel. We've got a load of boats coming over the English Channel, right? The English Channel, which the Normandy landings were taken over, the English Channel where we rescued 300,000 of our soldiers at Dunkirk. We've got all these ships coming over, and people have really, really had enough, but our government is not doing anything about it. And what happened cleverly under the Blair government was they brought it to a point where you could not debate immigration. If you did, you were then, if you brought it up, you were then called a racist, a far right extremist. You're to the right of Attila the Hun and all the rest. You weren't able to have, you weren't able to have that discussion. So maybe that's not a bad thing, where these ladies felt that they could now begin to discuss something publicly.
Yeah,
Rightly or
I think
wrongly?
that no. I mean, that makes sense, and I understand where you come from. I would say that I think that the reason that um, that people were averse to talking about racial issues in Britain. You talk about the Tony Blair era, so we're talking about like the
Mm,
early 2000s.
mm,
I would say that a lot of that has to do with the National Front in the late 70s, and the skinhead movement in the late 70s. Um, you know, Putting a bad taste in most Britain's mouth about racial issues, right? And nobody wants to be called a racialist and things of that nature. So I would say that's kind of maybe a little bit of a political outlier. I don't think that there's an equivalent of that in the U.S. because there wasn't really like this racist movement as recently
what do
as there was in
you
Britain.
don't think the racist movement that was started by the Democrats, the Ku Klux Klan, you don't think they
Yeah,
had
but
any?
that's 125 years ago. That's the difference. What I'm
Mm,
saying is that the British racist
mm,
movement
mm,
was in 1979,
mm,
and in the American racist movement was in 1869. So it really does matter.
mm.
I think that the amount of time, it does actually matter. So that can cause you know I guess what I'm saying is that it's kind of apples and oranges. You really can't necessarily compare the two.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting because with the Blair thing, it was suddenly there was a load of immigration coming from Poland, and it was only supposed to be X amount of thousands, and then it grew to rather a lot. That's so
yeah,
much that say, and I'm not blaming the Poles for this, that say over the last within the last few years, we've had more immigration than we have had in quite a few hundred years. Frankly, the
yeah,
figures it's unsustainable. We cannot sustain this because we're getting the equivalent of Birmingham as a city, every 5 minutes. I know that's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. We
yeah,
cannot
yeah. No, no.
we cannot sustain this. So going, and we're 48 minutes in, and we'll end this wonderful conversation shortly. But so these ladies engaged. He comes down the escalator, but
Yeah,
what was going on in the country where it made that people were Republican were getting very upset? What was actually going on
yeah. Barack Obama
politically?
got elected.
Yeah, yeah,
Barack Obama
and
got elected,
break
and
that
so
down.
yeah,
Break that
okay.
down.
So I think that Barack Obama's election. Um, I think there were a lot of people. This is just a theory of mine. I have
Mm,
no like. I can't back this up with any sort of facts. This is just my feelings. So you can disregard it if
mm,
you want. But I think that a lot of people who didn't consider themselves racists or didn't really care about politics or whatever, once they saw him and especially his wife in the White House, got really pissed off. And I think that they didn't know that they would get pissed off until it actually happened. And they thought, "Oh God, I can't stand the sight of this." And the reason that I think this is true is that the first Tea Party rally, right? And people forget that Tea Party, TEA, stood for taxed enough already, right?
mm,
Happened on tax day, which in America is April 15th, right? On 2000 in 2009, right? Barack Obama had been president for about 5 minutes, right? He had not enacted any sort of tax policy whatsoever, really any legislation at all, right?
mm, mm.
And all of a sudden, everybody is enraged about taxes when they didn't care about that the year before when George Bush was president. Let's see, what's the difference? Barack Obama is president, right? These people are infuriated about taxes. But if you went to the Tea Party rallies, like I did back in those days,
Mm.
you would find that people have these really like weird posters of Barack Obama with the Joker face or the Hitler face or all this other stuff. And it seems to be just about a singular person who, again, has not enacted any tax policy whatsoever, right? So it seemed to be just this racial thing. And then who was the face of the birther movement? It was Donald Trump, right? He's saying he's not an American. He's a Kenyan. I have no evidence for this, but I swear to God, he's a Kenyan. Okay,
I
fine.
thought it was Hillary Clinton that actually was the first
No,
person
actually,
who
Barack
raised the
Obama
birth.
started. Okay, yeah, there was a political strategist. You're correct, who did say, who did put out some nonsense about that in the 2008 election, but it didn't really catch any fire, and nobody really cared about it. But Trump went on Fox and Friends like every single week for about 5 years, saying that the man is not an American. Then when he finally puts out his long form birth certificate, Trump said, well, it's obviously a forgery. I mean, so it never mattered like whether he put it out or not.
Well,
It was
I
always
think
just
that'd be really
bullshit.
interesting. You'll have to have an interesting discussion with Sheriff Joe Arpaio over that because of the layers on layers on layers on layers. But
Okay, that's
I
all
hear
fine.
you.
That's all
But
well and
I
good. But
hear,
just to finish the point,
yeah.
like the backlash to Barack Obama's election is the reason that Trump got elected and the reason that we have racial problems in this country. It's not Barack Obama's fault, but it's a reality. Every single time in this country we've had a jump forward, a significant progress in um, racial politics, right? We've had a step back, right? So we take two steps forward and one step back, right? After the Civil War and Reconstruction, we had the rise of the KKK, who you rightly, said the Democratic Party created, right? But we ended up with a backlash there. We ended up with the KKK. We ended up with lynchings. We ended up with Jim Crow. After the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act, we ended up with uh, the Republican Party and the Southern strategy, which completely reversed like almost everything we attempted to do with the Voting Rights Act. So it tracks that Barack Obama's election would come with a backlash, and the backlash manifested itself in the person of Donald Trump.
Well, I politely, and I think this will be, we should continue this discussion, but I would politely turn around and say, in my opinion, Obama actually caused a lot of racial division himself when certainly identified with, sadly, the shootings of certain young black men. And then when you find out how that happened, then actually the
Trayvon
situation
Martin, yeah.
when Trayvon Martin, when he's trying, I believe in that situation, actually trying to get the gun off the particular police officer. So this is what is very it's emotive.
Well, he wasn't a police officer. Trayvon
Sorry,
Martin's killer,
yeah,
George Zimmerman, was
yeah,
not a police
yeah.
officer. He was a
In that,
scumbag.
sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm getting there is the other one that I'm getting confused with.
Okay.
But I hear I hear that, but I'm going to throw that out. And the other thing is that what I do find interesting is because in regard to Obama, his mother was white, so you've actually
Yeah.
got a mixed race person in there. I think I would throw out and say it's the fact that someone came from nowhere, the fact that his career to bid for political office in regard to Bill Ayers from the Weather Underground, there was a very, very interesting relationship there that needs to be unpacked. And I think maybe you and I will have this phrase, which is brilliant. I will suddenly think it's not about trumping, excuse the pun. It's about trying to look at facts and bring him to the table and have a discussion. Patrick, I cannot thank you enough for this discussion because I find it really, really invigorating. And I
Well, thank
think
you so
that
much for having me, Mark. I can't
no, what I
tell you
want to
how much.
do, I want to do this again and again. And I'll tell you why I
Sure.
want to do this again and again, because you are going to be boots on the ground. You go to these events, and I take my hat off to you. If I had my Trump hat on, I would take that off in honor of you. But I'm very grateful that you do that because you raise some important points. Like these ladies in Nashville, I'd love to sit down and go, so you didn't vote? Why? Why are you doing that now? What is it? Because I think we need to understand this. But the other thing is, if people are being motivated to get involved in the electoral process, I don't think that's a bad idea. But I hear the concern. I'm going to play us out. But Patrick, where can people find you? You've got 30 seconds.
You can't, because I've been banned from like every social media platform, so you
Oh
can't.
dear. Right. Well, we need to work out that, and that needs to change. And
Okay.
I wanna. Hopefully, I'm helping you with that. But yeah. Anyway, I'm going to
Yeah.
play us out. But Patrick, thank you very much for joining me. And I want to regularly do this because I really find this a really, really important, valuable um, conversation. And it's also, if we can show other people how to do it, I think that's a positive thing as well.
I do too. You're the boss with the sauce, Mark. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining me, everybody. And I'll join you again soon.